I'm Dr. Victoria Cross. This is the Crisis Wire. On January 30th, the United States Department of Justice released 3 million pages of files related to Jeffrey Epstein, more than 180,000 images, 2,000 videos, the largest single document dump in the investigation of the convicted sex offender who died in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019 while awaiting federal trial on sex trafficking charges. This release came 6 weeks after the DOJ missed a congressionally mandated deadline under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, legislation signed into law by President Trump on November 19, 2025. The scale of the release was unprecedented. Combined with earlier disclosures, the total production reached approximately 3.5 million pages. But within days of the release, something became clear. The files weren't just massive, they were flawed. Victims were exposed, powerful figures were protected, and the redaction decisions that were supposed to protect the innocent while exposing accountability appeared to do the opposite. Now, here's what we can confirm. On February 4th, just 5 days after the release, the DOJ removed thousands of documents from its public-facing website after lawyers for Epstein's victims filed an emergency motion with a federal judge. The lawyers argued that the release represented what they called the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history. Names that should have been redacted weren't. Nude photographs in which victims could be identified were published. Email addresses were exposed. In some cases, redactions were so poorly applied that names remained visible through thin black lines. One survivor told PBS that the failures felt intentional, saying there's just no explanation for how it could have been done so poorly. Another described the disclosure as life-threatening and reported receiving death threats after her private banking details appeared in the files. The DOJ has acknowledged the failures. A spokesperson told NPR that approximately 0.1% of released pages contained unredacted victim information. That figure, if accurate, translates to more than 3,000 pages. The department said it deployed 500 reviewers to examine millions of pages, but the sheer volume and the rushed timeline appear to have overwhelmed the process. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who announced the release, emphasized that the White House had no oversight over the review or redactions, but that assurance did little to ease the firestorm that followed. But here's what changes next. On February 9th, members of Congress began reviewing unredacted versions of the files inside a secure Department of Justice facility in Washington. The conditions were restrictive. Lawmakers were required to give 24 hours notice. They could not bring electronic devices. They could not bring staff members who had been researching the case. They were limited to viewing documents on government computers, taking only handwritten notes. And what they found reignited accusations that the Trump administration had shielded powerful figures from scrutiny. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky and Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California, the two lawmakers who spearheaded the Epstein Files Transparency Act, told reporters that they discovered at least 6 men whose names and in some cases photographs were redacted without clear legal justification. Massie said one was a high-ranking foreign government official. Another was described on social media as a well-known retired CEO and a sultan. At least one was a United States citizen. Khanna was blunt in his assessment, saying these 6 are just what we found in 2 hours of a review of the files, adding that the broader issue is why so many files are redacted in the first place. The law they wrote is explicit. The Epstein Files Transparency Act bars redactions made on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, including to any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. It allows redactions only in narrow circumstances, such as to protect victims' identities. Yet the released files are heavily redacted, and many of the redactions appear arbitrary. Representative Jamie Raskin, the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, told reporters after his review that he saw tons of completely unnecessary redactions, in addition to the failure to redact the names of victims. He said that was troubling. He accused the Justice Department of being in cover-up mode and breaking the law. Among the redacted material Raskin said he viewed was an email from Epstein to Gislane Maxwell containing an account from Epstein's lawyers of a conversation with attorneys representing Trump that occurred around 2009. According to Raskin, Trump was quoted as saying that while Epstein was never a member of his Mar-a-Lago club, he had been a guest and was never asked to leave. Raskin said that would contradict statements from the president, that he had at one point barred Epstein from his Florida property. That passage, Raskin said, was redacted for some indeterminate, inscrutable reason. The files released on January 30th contain thousands of mentions of President Trump. Many are news clippings, but some include lists and summaries of unsubstantiated claims made against him by individuals alleging wrongdoing, including graphic depictions of alleged sexual abuse involving underage girls. Some complaints date back to the 1990s. Others are more recent, from around the time he was campaigning for president. The DOJ said it was required by law to release everything, including documents that were fake or falsely submitted. In a statement accompanying the release, the department said some documents contain untrue and sensationalist claims against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election, adding, to be clear, the claims are unfounded and false. What remains unknown is whether these claims were substantially investigated. Trump has repeatedly denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes and says he broke off ties in the early 2000s before Epstein's plea deal. Now, here's the part that matters. An Associated Press review of the Internal Justice Department records released in the files shows that while the FBI collected ample proof that Epstein sexually abused underage girls, investigators found scant evidence that the well-connected financier led a sex trafficking ring serving powerful men. Videos and photos seized from Epstein's homes in New York, Florida, and the Virgin Islands did not depict victims being abused or implicate anyone else in his crimes, according to a prosecutor's memo from 2025. An examination of Epstein's financial records, including payments he made to entities linked to influential figures in academia, finance, and global diplomacy, found no connection to criminal activity. Another internal memo from 2019 stated, while one Epstein victim, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, made highly public claims that Epstein lent her to his rich friends, agents could not confirm that and found no other victims telling a similar story, the records said. Summarizing the investigation in an email last July, agents said 4 or 5 Epstein accusers claimed other men or women had sexually abused them. But there was not enough evidence to federally charge these individuals, so the cases were referred to local law enforcement. The files also reveal something else. There is no client list. In February 2025, Attorney General Pam Bondi told Fox News that Epstein's never-before-seen client list was sitting on her desk. A few months later, she claimed the FBI was reviewing tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child pornography. But FBI agents wrote their superiors saying the client list did not exist. On December 30th, 2024, about 3 weeks before President Biden left office, then FBI Deputy Director Paula Bate reached out through subordinates to ask whether the investigation indicated the client list often referred to in the media does or does not exist. A day later, an FBI official replied that the case agent had confirmed no client list existed. On February 19th, 2025, 2 days before Bondi's Fox News appearance, an FBI supervisory special agent wrote that while media coverage of the Jeffrey Epstein case references a client list, investigators did not locate such a list during the course of the investigation. What the files do reveal is a web of connections. Epstein surrounded himself with wealthy and influential people from a variety of disciplines and ideologies. The newly released documents show ties to politicians, business titans, academics, and celebrities, both before and after he pleaded guilty in 2008 to prostitution charges, including soliciting an underage girl. Reuters has documented communications and meetings involving figures including former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Britain's former Prince Andrew, now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, billionaire Elon Musk, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, and dozens of others. Being mentioned in the documents is not an indication of wrongdoing or knowledge of Epstein's crimes, but the files show how Epstein leveraged social capital and philanthropy to maintain proximity to power long after his first conviction. And this is why it's bigger than it looks. On February 9th, Gislane Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate and convicted child sex trafficker, appeared virtually before the House Oversight Committee in a closed-door deposition. She repeatedly invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, refusing to answer questions about Epstein, potential co-conspirators, or men who reached settlements with victims. Her attorney suggested she would provide a complete account if President Trump granted her clemency. Maxwell is currently serving a 20-year federal prison sentence after being convicted in 2021 of recruiting and grooming several of Epstein's victims and, in some cases, joining the sexual abuse. Her refusal to cooperate deepens the accountability gap. The files show a network. They show payments. They show communications. But they do not show prosecutions beyond Epstein and Maxwell. Attorney General Bondi is scheduled to testify before the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, February 12th. Lawmakers from both parties have said they want answers about how the department handled the files, why victims were exposed, and why powerful figures appear to have been shielded. Bondi admitted in a recent statement that mistakes were made in the handling of the Epstein files, particularly regarding the redactions of victim information. But the broader questions remain. Why were names of men redacted when the law explicitly prohibits redactions based on embarrassment or political sensitivity? Why were victims exposed when the law explicitly requires their protection? And why, after more than 15 years of investigation and the suicides of both Epstein and his associate Jean-Luc Brunel in custody, has no one else been charged? There are three plausible paths forward. The best-case scenario is that Attorney General Bondi orders a comprehensive review of the redaction process, unredacts the names of individuals whose concealment violated the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and provides Congress and the public with a detailed accounting of why certain decisions were made. In this scenario, victims whose information was exposed receive support and protection, and the Justice Department commits to releasing the remaining approximately 3 million pages of Epstein-related documents it still possesses. Indicators to watch for this scenario include Bondi's testimony on Wednesday, whether she announces concrete corrective actions, and whether additional unredacted files are released in the coming weeks. The most likely scenario is a protracted political fight. Congress will continue reviewing unredacted files on a limited basis, but the pace will be slow and painstaking. Raskin noted that of the 3.5 million documents released, he was able to review only 30 or 40 in his first session. At that rate, comprehensive congressional oversight could take months or years. Meanwhile, the files that have already been released will continue to be analyzed by journalists, researchers, and the public. Some names may be revealed through congressional testimony or floor speeches where lawmakers have immunity. Others may remain concealed indefinitely. Victims will continue to push for full transparency while also seeking protection from further exposure. Indicators for this scenario include limited movement on additional releases, continued partisan disagreement over the scope of redactions, and ongoing litigation over victim privacy. The worst-case scenario is that the process stalls entirely. The Justice Department releases no further documents or releases them so heavily redacted that they provide no new information. Congressional oversight becomes mired in procedural disputes. Victims lose trust in the process and withdraw cooperation. The names of powerful figures who may have been complicit in or aware of Epstein's crimes remain concealed, and no further accountability is achieved. Public interest wanes as the story becomes perceived as another example of elite impunity. Indicators for this scenario include Attorney General Bondi declining to commit to further transparency during her testimony, continued heavy redactions in any future releases, and victims or their advocates publicly withdrawing from cooperation with federal authorities. The Epstein files represent one of the most significant transparency efforts in modern American justice. But transparency without accuracy is not accountability. The files released so far reveal a system that protected the powerful and exposed the vulnerable. Whether that changes depends on what happens next. Subscribe to the Crisis Wire if you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops. Here's my question for you. If you were a member of Congress with access to the unredacted files, what would be the first thing you'd look for? Drop your answer in the comments. We'll be back with updates as Attorney General Bondi testifies and as more files are reviewed. This is Dr. Victoria Cross. Stay sharp.